What is going on, guys? It's Bodhi right here. So yesterday we hit a new peak of 200,000 concurrent players logged into the video game, which a lot of people have been very excited about. I want to be excited about it as well, but I have to curb my enthusiasm a little bit because I don't believe that looking at numbers in a vacuum is a good thing. I believe that we should look at the context of these numbers and we should look at the contributing factors. What is it that allows us to have 200,000 concurrent players logged into the game at a time? If we could identify these factors that enables us to have 200k logged in at a time, then we could emulate and replicate these things so that we could push the number even higher than 200,000 if we see 200,000 players as a good amount of players, and if we believe that a higher player count is something that we should strive for. So we would have to see if we could identify these factors, and if we can identify them, then we can perpetuate them and we can replicate them to get even higher player count. But when we take a look at the contributing factors that have enabled us to hit 200,000 concurrent players, then we find that the contributing factors fall into one of two categories. A, they are either unsustainable, or B, they outright harmful for the game. And so this renders it impossible to replicate and emulate these contributing factors if we want to contribute to an even higher player count. But let's just take a look at what the contributing factors in this 200,000 number is. So the first factor that gives us this high player count is, of course, leagues. Leagues is a very popular game mode that certainly inflates the amount of players that are logged into the game at a really high rate. So, and the thing about the league player count is that it is not a sustainable number. It is only something that you see in the short term, and then it dwindles off. So we can't just have more leagues if we want to have more player count. Because what would happen if the league took place, let's say, if it was a permanent thing, or it lasted for like, I don't know, 6 months, then followed by a 1 month break, and then taking place again for another 6 months, then what would happen is after like 4 months into these leagues, is that the player count would drop to like a couple thousand at best. 1 or 2,000 would maybe play these game modes. So this goes to show that leagues are unsustainable in maintaining a high player count. It's simply something that contributes to the inflation in the short term. But of course, there is some turnover. Like, there are some players that will pick up leagues, and then after leagues is over, they will actually continue playing the game when they otherwise wouldn't have played the game in the first place. But on the other hand, there are also people who play leagues and then burn out of leagues after leagues are over. So I think these two things probably offset each other. So, but of course, there is some marketing value and there's some exposure to the game. So at least that's good. But in terms of like a healthy, sustainable player count, we can't really use this as a good factor, as a good reason to have more leagues. Then the next factor is, of course, bots. Or I think the botting situation over the last year has gotten pretty bad. It's to the point where we saw the Hunter high scores, they were completely overtaken by bots that were allowed to go all the way to 200 million before they were caught. And they didn't even bother like having like unique names or anything. They just smashed the keyboard in the account creation process or whatever automated account creation process that they have going on. They don't even bother with anything anymore. And the fact that they were allowed to go all the way to 200 mil before getting caught is just unreal. And it is not only that, but it's also we have seen like some of these corrupted gauntlet bots, CG bots. They're running 24/7. Like, they're posting 700 EHB mons consistently. So they're just suicide botting, running all the time. And some of these bots have actually been banned. Like, they will receive a perm ban, they will disappear off the high scores. But then you look, and this is obvious because they are suicide botting 24/7. They're logged into the game 720 hours a month. But then so they receive this permanent ban, which is of course appropriate. And then what happens when you look a month or two later is that for some reason they are actually unbanned again, and they can just continue the same thing over and over. So like there's something weird going on with the botting situation that is pretty hard to explain, and it's not looking pretty. It looks like they've dealt with with some of it, but then it just reappears. So I don't really know the extent of it, because we saw that Superior Dragon Bones, for example, because of how bad the body situation had gotten with Warcraft, we saw that Superior Dragon Bones had dropped to 7,000 each, and now they've picked back up a little bit. But like, it goes to show that like botting is in a really bad spot right now, and it's certainly in a much worse spot than it was 3 years ago. But I don't actually know how bad it is relative, because I don't have the numbers. I don't have the number of how many bots are currently logged into the game versus what was that number, what was the percentage of that number 5 years ago, for example. But I do believe that the botting situation is worse than it was back then. So this is certainly a contributing factor as well to the high player count. Then another factor in the high player count that we're seeing right now is Runelite's 25-minute idle timer. This was made legal for a while ago, but it wasn't available like 4 years ago. Maybe it was used by some people on some sketchy client, but now it's made it into the mainstream. It is a plugin that is utilized by pretty much everyone, and pretty much everyone that is using Runelite, which is the majority of the player base. And this 25-minute idle timer enables people to stay logged in situations where they would otherwise have been logged out of the game. So many people, they go AFK, after 5 minutes they are booted off the game, and they would have to log in again, but now they just remain logged in. And this contributes quite a bit actually, in terms of inflating the player count, in terms of the player that are logged in, when people are just standing around idling, not doing anything. So this is also a factor that just makes it pretty much impossible to compare player numbers from today to 5 years ago, because you have to account for something like this. So that is another factor that you have to look at in terms of the contribution to 200,000 logged in players. Then the next contributing factor is in line with the one that I just mentioned, but it is 6 hours, 6-hour AFK methods. They have been brought back on the menu. They were removed so that after, like back in the day, you used to be able to do 6 hour of Nightmare Zone Goffen's AFK. Then they removed that by making it so that after 20 minutes of not interacting with the client, you would not be auto-retaliating anymore. And you couldn't get around this by putting something on the spacebar, something like that. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't count as an interaction with the game. But recently, they changed that. So, and the reason they made this change is because, let me see if I can find this. As we can see in the changelog here, it has to do with the escape crystals that were made for hardcore Iron Man accounts, so that if they don't interact with the game, they will be teleported away automatically. And what the issue was that some hardcore Iron Man, they would be doing PVM, for example, and they would be using the F keys, but the F keys wouldn't count as a trigger. It wouldn't trigger the system, so they would actually be teleported away when they were actually interacting with the client. And so what happened when they wanted to fix this, they wanted to make it so F keys, for example, or hitting the spacebar would count as an interaction. So what happened is that now it worked like this for everyone in the game. So if you hold your spacebar down, it counts as you interacting with the game. And so you will just be able to 6-hour Nightmare Zone AFK if you want to. And this is like it is an unintended consequence of an update that they made. And I don't even think they updated, like the update itself is pretty bad. Like this escape crystal thing, it's sort of like a private server-esque thing that probably shouldn't have been put in the game in the first place. But not only that, it also has unintended consequences in the form of now enabling players to 6-hour AFK at a time, which obviously shouldn't be a thing in this game. And this is something that is heavily abused. Like on the main game, it's mostly for combats, of course, but so people are just able to stay logged in for 24 hours at a time, where they're just sitting in item zone, they're splashing or whatever. And you also see that on leagues where like half the player base are running around the fountain, so they gain passive agility experience. And you can also do it with something like Karam ones, for example, on leagues where you just 24/7. You can play 700 hours a month by just putting something on your spacebar when you're doing these methods. And this certainly uh, booms the number of players that are logged into the game at a time when these methods are available. These are methods that make it so players that otherwise would have been locked out of the game, they are now logged into the game 24/7, and they are gaining experience. And this contributes to a higher player count, so it inflates the player count, but it's of course also an integrity issue on top of it. And this thing about these 6-hour FK methods is that they're in some sense a form of glorified botting, where we think it's acceptable to where Jagex thinks it's acceptable, but they will actually punish regular botting. But this is not much different. You are training a method 6 hours at a time without interacting with the game, and so this falls in. This would certainly be something that everyone should consider as botting. It's hard to see what the distinction between botting and 6-hour methods are. So they should be regarded as the same thing, and it certainly shouldn't be made available to people. But some people have said that the reason they don't like we're going back to the discussion about bots, the reason they haven't banned bots at a high rate is because they want to inflate the amount of people that are logged in. Because if they inflate the number of people logged into the game, then they will be able to more easily sell off the company, because of course a high player count has a lot of shareholder value, and so that's why they have an interest in inflating this number as much as they can, and that's why they don't ban bots. That's what a lot of people have been saying, and I've seen this take a lot on Reddit. But I actually don't think that. I think there are like two things that come into conflict with one another here. So one is, on one hand, they of course want to have a high player count because it looks good. That's one thing. But this comes into conflict with what allowing gold farming to the game does of harm to the game. And the harm that is caused by bots outweighs the increased player count. And not only that, but there's also a profit incentive that outweighs the increased player count, because when they ban bots, it means the bots will have to make new accounts, which means they will also have to go out of the way to get more new membership, and that's of course very good for the Jagex wallet. So they also have a profit incentive to ban bots. So this is a reason why they are, for example, why I believe they are banning bots, but they are not banning removing 6-hour AFK methods, even though they are practically the same thing. The reason is if they remove the 6-hour AFK methods, it's not gonna change the wallet in one way or another. It's not gonna make them more money. It's not gonna make them less money. But what it is going to do is that it's going to increase the amount of players that are logged into the game, which looks good. And it does so at the expense of the integrity of the game, of course. But it doesn't do it at the expense of the wallet. So this is why they don't care about botting, but they don't care about legitimate. I say that in quotation marks. They don't care about legitimate players using 6-hour FK methods. So the 6-hour AFK methods, as well as the 25-minute idle timer, are some of the contributing factors to the increased player count, and which has enabled us to have this 200k peak. And the next point I want to mention is that if we believe that a high player count is seen as something good and it's an ideal that we should strive for, then what we could simply do, like if we only want to look at player count in isolation, we want to look at it in a vacuum, then what we could do is we could simply just have it so you could be logged in for 24 hours at a time, change the login timer to 24 hours from 6 hours, and we could make it so the idle timer is also increased to 24 hours. So this means that people would be able to stay logged in for 24 hours at a time, and suddenly you would go from one day to another, you would be able to go from a 200k peak to a 300k peak, just like with the snap of a finger. So this is also why it's silly to just think that a high player count is in itself good. You have to look at it in the specific context. And there's so many things going on right now that I think discounts this high number that people are talking about. Of course, it on paper it looks good that we have 200k people, but when you dig into the numbers and you look at all of these contributing factors, it's actually not. It's not surprising, and it's actually not as high as people would think. And another thing that inflates the amount of players that are logged into the game is, of course, the fact that all the counts are allowed. They were also allowed 5 years ago, and certainly used by people 5 years ago. So when we are comparing the player count now to the player count in 2018, it's on the same level, you can say, because both Alding was allowed in both periods of game, so they would be comparable. But certainly not if we compare the player count from today with the player count of back then. Like if you look 16, 17 years ago, when we hit like the 250k, 300k peak. So like on this screenshot, you can see, let me see. On this old screenshot, you can see that we had from this particular day, we had 206k people logged into the game at a time, and the peak was even higher than that. Like this was just a normal day gamings that we had insane player counts. Not always above 200k, but certainly very, very high all the time. And this was without all of these contributing factors that I've just mentioned outside of bots. Of course, bots were also a thing back then, but it's also without all the counts. Like back then you had 250k people playing the game, and that is without people using all the counts. So like, for example, if like some players, they have 5 accounts that they're playing on at a time, and so they count as 5 players, but technically they're only 1 player on 5 different accounts. There's a difference between accounts logged in and players playing the game. So this certainly also inflates the number of players that are logged into the game if you want to compare it to the amount of players back in the day. So yeah, I think it's important that people have this in mind when they are trying to evaluate the numbers of people logged in and what it means. Because like, if you want to take the numbers from back in 2006, 2007, and we would convert them into what they would be in today's era and today's time, then I think 250,000 or 300,000 people logged in back then is probably roughly equivalent to, like, I think a good assumption is to say 1.2 million, 1.5 million players logged in at a time in today's age. So we will obviously never hit 1.2 to 1.5 million players logged in concurrently, which means we will effectively never be able to beat the old record. But that's just an assumption, of course. It could be off a little bit, but it's certainly the case that 200k players logged in in 2006 is certainly worth a lot more than 200,000 people logged into the game in today's day and age. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say on this topic. It's always good to be mindful of when you're just looking at an absolute number, you're not seeing it in a specific context. So last time that I was doing a ramble, I promised that I would ramble for shorter than the first ramble video I made. So I didn't keep that promise. So I'm gonna try and just cut the head off the video this time, so it doesn't run for hours on end. Yeah. So see you in the next one.